Take a seat.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I didn't realize that in just 1 year with the Straits Times, you learn how to write headlines, do infographics, choose pictures. I thought that was excellent. You can tell a minister who's been a journalist before. We have some time for questions. I would like to, while you think about your questions, I would like to ask Ambassador Pani to ask the first question. Pani, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. But before that, can I say how pleased ISIS is in partnering the Singapore Press Club in this series of high-level talks. For us, it's part of our outreach program where we, in the ivory tower of academia, we do venture out on these occasions to the real world. And this is the real world. Mr. Minister, you gave us a very fascinating picture of what the present situation is. And if I go by that, what we see now is the easy part. What would be the hard part when the anticipated population of Singapore reaches 6 million people?
Is that a comment or a question?
Question.
Okay. The 6.5 million is scenario planning, so it's not a hard target for the government. What we have done in this master plan is to look ahead 10, 15 years. And based on the population projection, and that would include not just the growth of the resident population, but tourists coming in to Singapore, visitors. The plan, therefore, matches that. We were trying to cater for the increased ridership from this flow of people. So that's why we are spending close to $40 billion. This is a massive rail building program. We're building new lines, the Thomson Line. We're building the Thomson Line, the Eastern Regional Line. There's north-south and then east-west. We're also building the downtown line. In fact, for the downtown line, we brought it forward. Some sections of the downtown line, we brought it forward. The Circle Line, originally, part of it, we're going to open it in 2010. We're now opening it earlier, 2009. And we're extending the existing MRT network. So this is in anticipation. I think one of the hallmarks of policymaking in Singapore is that we tend to anticipate way ahead because I think we are perpetual worriers, So we look at it and we are concerned about what will happen in the future. So because we're always worried, we tend to anticipate and take action early.
Okay, Ace, I know you want to start, but I think there was a hand up here first. The next question is yours. Yep. I need a mic over there. Anybody? Sorry, you need to come out to the center, please. Sorry. Looks like the mics are down the middle, folks. So if you could just tell us your name and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Sonia Kolesnikov with Newsweek. I have two questions, if I may. I've been here in Singapore for almost 8 years, and when I first arrived here, I used to think that this public transport was the best in the world, coming from London. Now, 8 years down the line, things are not as rosy as they used to be, and as you talked. And I appreciate that in terms of train, there is so much the government can do because you cannot put more train on the line and you have to wait. So I'm taking the bus. This morning, to come into downtown around 9:30, I had to wait for 25 minutes for a bus. And this is something that is happening very often. Now, you're talking about encouraging people to take common transport, but on the bus side, there's still a lot that could be done. And I want to know what is the government doing to control that SMRT and the bus companies are, actually delivering. And would the government consider imposing I don't know, financial sanction, for example, if the bus is, you should have a bus coming every 10 minutes. You shouldn't have to wait 30 minutes in the bus, even at 6 o'clock in the evening. The second question is on transport policy and what the government is doing with family right now and trying to encourage Singaporeans to have bigger family and more babies. Yes, you still have to pay for your children to take public transports. There's all these arguments recently about the 90 centimeters, and that's really an 18-month child, so you're still having to pay. And I'm not even talking about the issue of expats like me who have to pay adult fare for their children when they're 7-year-olds because they're foreign students. But just in general, as a family of 5, if I take public transport, sometimes it's cheaper to take a taxi than to take public transport. So why, in countries like in Europe, in France, you don't pay for children, or you have family cards. If you have a big family, and Singaporeans might have 2 or 3 children, then you get a discount if you travel as a family. Surely this would encourage people to travel in group and use the public transport.
Thank you. Two questions in there, Minister.
2 questions from Sonia. In terms of bus frequencies, that is something that we are tightening up. Like you said, you shouldn't have to wait 20 minutes during the morning peak, or the evening peak for that matter. Yep. So during the peak periods, we're going to tighten up on the frequency. But we're giving the operators, I think, over 2 years to do this. Yeah. So originally, the present position is 15 minutes. For the areas which were affected by the ERP changes, we brought it down, I think, to 12 minutes and eventually to 10 minutes over a 2-year period. So that is being addressed. Concession policy, you're saying that it might be cheaper to take a taxi than to take the public transport, then maybe the taxi is mispriced. The concession policy involves cross-subsidy. There are only 2 ways to do this, concession policies. One is cross-subsidy, which means that the adult fare-paying passenger takes more of the burden, and another group, therefore, takes less. That's one way. The other way to do it is government subvention. So in Europe, if you go to, say, London, the reason why you have all these travel cards is because of heavy state subvention. In many of these European cities, the subvention can go up to close to 60%. We have not done so. Singapore, Hong Kong, perhaps the 2 major cities where the operating revenue actually covers the operating costs. And this is a discipline that we want to keep. So these are the principal options that we have.
Yes. Ace, can we keep questions short so that we
can have more questions? Good afternoon, Minister and ladies and gentlemen. I've got 2 questions, but I will make it short. Is it possible for your ministry to implement rules to install license plate and rear view mirrors for all bicycles because of safety issue and also that issue and also
bicycles.
Bicycles, yes, for rear view mirrors and
Just checking.
Sure, okay. Because at the moment there is no rear view mirrors and license plate for this vehicle. And secondly, is it possible that for the government to control the number of car owned by per family? Because I believe there are many families who own more than 1 car who doesn't necessarily need it because they will just use it from home to work and work to home. And I even know some families, which I will not name them, they have more cars than their own family members. So this is a bit ridiculous. So what can the government do to encourage these people not to buy too many cars? I mean, even though they are rich. Thank you.
Of course, anything is, whether it's possible for the government to look into this. Anything is possible. As I said, we can consider anything. But we made a decision in the 80s that when it comes to bicycles, because it's a recreational activity, so we stopped insisting that it be registered. And if you look at many cities in the world, they don't register the bicycle. Yeah. So if it's an enforcement issue, then I think, like all enforcement issue, if you make a report, they'll investigate. So I think on the bicycle, there's the background to it, that we treated it as a recreational activity. Or not, we'll be licensing tricycles, the children's tricycle. I mean, where do you draw the line? So the baby ride the bicycle, is it license that too? And put a rear window, right? The rear screen window, you say. Put it in, mirror, yeah. Put that in. On limiting families, how many cars you can have. I think we need to understand how this whole system works. Yeah? How do we deal with congestion? Two ways to do this, and we're using both measures. One, we control the supply side, amount of cars in Singapore. The other one is on the usage side, which is your ERP, both measures. So on the supply side, we use the COE. Once we decide on what is the car population growth rate, that is your control lever for congestion purposes. So once you decide that it's going to be 3%, and let's say that is 26,500 cars, extra cars coming out, that is your control lever. After that, who owns it doesn't change the congestion situation. What would change is the usage pattern, right, of the person owning the car. So I think that's the way to look at it. So if we were to do what you suggest, it's not really doing it as a congestion measure. It becomes more like a wealth measure. Like you say, well, you're a rich person, so if you're a rich person, therefore I find certain ways to tax you. You cannot own more than 1 or 2 cars. But it's a completely different policy goal that you're going for then.
Any more questions? Yep, I see Irene.
Irene Ho, formerly also of the Straits Times. Has the government ever thought of making, you spoke of making public transport more attractive. Has the government ever thought of making it completely irresistible? That is, making bus and MRT free for citizens?
This is what happens when you leave the Straits Times. Sorry. Irene, I didn't mean to take a dig, but I suppose the question is,
Should we make it free? Well, from time to time, we get suggestions like this. We had someone who wrote in quite seriously. We have a magazine called Pater, which is the PAP party magazine, and he wrote in, and he says one way to make Singapore really attractive is to make public transport free, so that when the visitor comes back, they have a great time. You jump on our MRT, they jump on our buses, and it is free. But the key question you have to ask yourself is then who pays for it? Because the cost remains. So every time you hear people saying, let's make this thing free, then you say, okay, but who pays for it? If it is free, it means everybody in this room pays for it. Every single taxpayer will pay for it, regardless of whether you use it or not. Because under our present system, you pay if you use it. And it's a fairer system, and I think instill a certain discipline into it. The minute you make it free, it doesn't end there. What you're going to get is overconsumption, because if it is free, people will just take more trips than they want to. And the experience of countries that have subvented, not even free, just subvented it, which means that they bring down the fares below its operating cost, is that the deficit continue to expand. You just keep on growing. So you take Seoul, which had their bus reform not too long ago. One of the major changes they did was that. They said, well, let's have government subvention. And when we met the Seoul transport officials, they said, end result, deficit keep on shooting up. And that's the reason why we have not gone down this road.
Yes.
I'm B.K. Rajan from Chesterton International. Minister, reverting to the humble cyclists, I don't advocate registration, but certainly they should have a little bit more discipline on the roads. They do not follow any rules, most of them. And that causes a lot of inconvenience to the motorists, who have to be extra careful, and it causes accidents. On the other thing, one who has been here for a long time, in the service since 1959, for a long while, I know how difficult it was to bring discipline at the roads, enforcement of rules, and the pedestrian crossings. Now it has become very optional. If you want, you wait for the light. If not, you just dash. I've seen vehicles, even pedestrian crossing, just not waiting for the pedestrians to complete the journey, just dash past, sometimes missing narrowly. I think these are things which we should address. Thank you.
I think the short answer to both examples that you brought up, I think three things that we have to do. So you take cycling, for instance. One, we need to educate people, both the cyclists and the pedestrians, so they both understand how to live and let live. Two, enforcement, effective enforcement. And three, in the case of cycling, we're looking at it now on a town-by-town basis. We started with Tampines. We're looking at the infrastructure and how best to enhance the infrastructure so as to facilitate cycling. So where we can, we'll try to widen the footpaths so that it might be soft segregation, which means if we just draw a line on the footpath, but we widen it a bit, so cyclists go on one lane and pedestrians on the other lane. But even then, you need to educate people, right? You can go to the East Coast Parkway. We segregate where's cycling and where's pedestrian, and yet people just cross over. So you need to educate and you need to have some level of enforcement.
Take a seat.